What is culture fit? How do you know if you fit with your organization and role? Why should companies hire for culture fit? Hear this and more from Aoife O'Brien, host of the Happier at Work podcast. Hey there, I'm Krista Vance, entrepreneur and operations leader.
And I'm Matt Vance, award-winning author and social innovation researcher. We're your hosts of the Culture Profit podcast.
Your place for purposeful company culture strategy.
Learn from HR pros, executives, and thought leaders how to prioritize profits by prioritizing people.
This episode is sponsored by Mobrium, the best friend of forward-thinking HR leaders, helping you strengthen your employer reputation as a reflection of your real culture.
Learn more at mobrium.com. Today we're meeting with a very special guest all the way from Dublin, Ireland. We'd like to welcome Aoife O'Brien, host of the Happier at Work podcast and founder of Happier at Work, the careers and culture platform. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Matt and Krista. It's my absolute pleasure to be here today.
Let's hear a little bit about Aoife. So Aoife O'Brien is a company culture expert, public speaker, and award-winning podcast host. She consults a wide variety of organizations on how to increase retention and productivity of teams while creating a positive and engaging work experience. With a background in data analytics from the CPG industry, Aoife takes a pragmatic approach to culture strategy with a personal touch.
It's very impressive. And while we were talking, previously, I loved hearing a little bit more about some of the work you've done with data analytics of retail spaces and kind of that experience and how that, I guess maybe speak to us a little bit about how that transitioned over to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it was a career that I loved. I did it for almost 20 years. I'm so interested by data and its application, what we can use it for. And I found myself in some work situations that weren't really working out for me. Wasn't really a good fit when I didn't understand that terminology at the time. But when I look back at that time, I think it just wasn't a good fit for me, both from a culture perspective and from a strengths perspective as well. So I left my long-term career and I went off and I did some coach training and I had masters in organizational behavior. And when I was doing the masters, it was the application, it was the data, the research, and the people aspect of it that really lit me up, because when I had been working in corporate, I always tried to understand, like, what could I have done differently, or what should the organization be doing differently? So always thinking from that people perspective, like how can we do things differently? How can we continually innovate? And how can we make sure that things like this don't happen in the first place? So taking everything that I've learned there and applying it, I suppose, in this new space where it's looking more at the people side of things.
Wow, that's way impressive.
That's really neat. And we know you're calling in from, tell us again, where you're calling in.
Tenerife, which is in the Canary Islands, which is part of Spain, but off the coast of Africa. So if anyone is watching video, I'm not sure if you're watching on video today, but it's very warm. It's very warm here today. Yeah.
Yeah, and where we're from is on the cooler side, and so she's across the world. You're also from Dublin, and we know you love to travel. So tell us a little bit about like some of the best places you've been to. We know you've been all over the world, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So I lived and worked in London for 3.5 years after leaving Dublin, and I traveled around Southeast Asia for 5 or 6 months, and then I spent about 2.5 years living and traveling around Australia. In that time, I traveled around New Zealand for 4 weeks as well. And I went to Hawaii on my way back, and I traveled around the States for a little while and a little bit of Canada. I came home for Christmas, and then I came back to the States and I went down to the South, down to Miami. And I went around South America then for about 5 or 6 months again, which included a trip to Antarctica and the Galapagos Islands.
Holy
so
cow.
I've done a huge amount of travel. I absolutely love, I love meeting new people. I love exploring the world and seeing things, especially if it's something that you're familiar with, if you've seen images or videos or documentaries or something, and then you go and actually get to experience that firsthand. Trying to pick a best place is really, really hard. But one place I think that I didn't know much about and I didn't have very high expectations was around southern Argentina and Chile, where you can
Oh,
do loads of hiking. It's in the mountains, and just the scenery was absolutely fantastic. And I didn't really know much about the area. Obviously, having been to Antarctica, it's very unusual, and not
yes.
a lot of people have been there. So that was also a big highlight for me. I think people, having seen images and things, you sort of know what to expect, but it's the sensation of being there. It's like the end of the world.
Yeah.
And then another highlight that I mentioned a second ago, the Galapagos Islands, like just the sheer amount of wildlife that they have there and being able to get up close and personal, and they're not afraid of humans. It's, you know, it's very much interactive, and that was just absolutely stunning as
Wow.
well.
Holy cow. Did you see a lot of the animals in the Galapagos Islands as well? The birds and
The birds, the lizards, the seals and sea lions, and yeah, like we went swimming and snorkeling, and
Oh my
it
heavens.
was just stunning. Yeah, yeah, really, really was. I would highly recommend for anyone to go there.
and that is remarkable. And talk about quite the experience traveling the world. And now you're in this new world of company culture. You had this other career life in retail and CPG and doing data analytics, and now you've leveled up with all this different experience and training, organizational behavior and strategy there. I think it's amazing. So maybe talk to us a little bit more about how you came to found the Happier at Work podcast, Happier at Work as the culture platform, and just speak to us about that journey and what you're doing now.
Absolutely, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, it really sprung from my own dissatisfaction at work. So I had an experience when I was working in Australia. I had a fantastic experience working in one organization for 6 months, and I left and I worked on the other side of Australia, and they were very kind to sponsor my visa and all sorts of brilliant things. But I found within a couple of months, I realized it wasn't really the place for me. Now, when you're sponsored and on a visa, it makes the decision that little bit more awkward about like, what is my next move here? How can I rectify the situation? So I did try to kind of rectify things, but I just found it wasn't really going anywhere. So that was kind of incident number one, let's say. And then as I mentioned, I took some time out to travel, and I traveled quite a bit, and I ended up back in Dublin, having previously been in London and having always harbored this desire to go and live in New York. I did end up back in Dublin, and I worked there in an organization for 4.5 years, which was a bit of a roller coaster. So it wasn't toxic as such as the previous place had been, but it was not a good fit for me. It wasn't the right place. I wasn't thriving. I wasn't, when I do something, I want to do it really well. And I didn't feel like I had the opportunity to do that there. So I left. And I went on to do the study that I mentioned. And the podcast came about because I am such an avid podcast listener. I love listening to podcasts. I love it as a format. I love learning things. I love listening. I love being inspired by other people. So I thought, I have this idea that I want to get out in the world. I'm just going to start it. So I had a microphone. I signed up for a SoundCloud account, or at least I had a SoundCloud account already. And I just started uploading podcasts there. I created an RSS feed, and the rest, as they say, is history. It's something I've learned that I'm actually quite good at and that I really enjoy doing as well.
And we know you have over 100 episodes now. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
what's that?
170 something. Yeah.
Okay, that's
Oh
what I
my
was thinking.
goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
It'll be
total
200
newbies.
in March.
Holy cow, that's something to celebrate for sure.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
definitely. Yeah, there's
So,
already plans afoot to do something special in March to celebrate 200
oh,
episodes.
good. That's such an accomplishment. I mean, having done, just a little over 10 now, I can't even imagine. Like, that's just so, to stick with something for that long. That's amazing.
Yeah. It's streamlined, it's automated, all things again that I didn't know that I was good at. But it's the understanding the systems and how to make things work better for me and how to make things more efficient. I'm learning a lot about that, and realizing that I'm actually quite good at it as well. So that's good.
You are. Yeah, and for those who are listening, definitely check out the Happier at Work podcast. It really will add to, and our same audience, I think, is HR. And so I think anyone listening to our podcast would definitely gain a lot from yours as well. So
Thank you.
we're
Yes.
super happy to have you here. And what you mentioned was fit. So you felt
Yeah.
like you didn't fit in at that company. Tell us a little bit about the importance of fit and how that works.
Yeah. So when I started my master's, I had a conversation with one of the lecturers explaining what had happened in my previous two work environments. And she mentioned that, this must be a fit issue. So I became obsessed with this idea. I did all my research around it, and there's so many different ways to measure it. And what I ended up doing was my entire dissertation around this, any opportunity to do a paper on fit. If we had a choice of what we could cover, that was what I was doing. And at the end of that, like oftentimes they say that you'll be sick of the whatever topic you chose for your dissertation. I still have so much more to learn about it, and I love learning more about it. But really, I looked at environmental fit, and the core pillars, if you like, in it were this idea of values. So understanding what your values are and how closely those values align with the organization. And then need satisfaction at work. So we have three core psychological needs that we all have, which are autonomy, relatedness, and competence. So autonomy being a sense of choice and control over what you do and how you do it. Relatedness then is how you get along with other people, but also how you relate what you do on a day-to-day basis to the impacts that you're having on the organization, their objectives, and their results. And then competence is a feeling of capability over what you're doing. So do you feel like you're capable of doing the job, or is it too much of a stretch for you, or is it not enough of a stretch? Maybe you're feeling a bit bored or complacent. And then the third aspect, the academic jargon was talking about demands and abilities, but I kind of changed that around to talk more about strengths. So if we can understand what our strengths are at work, know what we're really good at, what we're naturally good at, and build on those rather than trying to mitigate our weaknesses, it's really important to do that at work and to feel like you're thriving and to feel like you're being challenged and that you're doing stuff that's important and that's using the abilities that you have. And so they are the kind of the core elements of it. So it's the values piece, the needs piece, and the strengths piece, although I'm changing the language around on it a little bit. So values is kind of more about culture, needs is around balance, because you need to find the balance between having, say, too much autonomy and too little autonomy, where you could feel a bit directionless or feel like you're being micromanaged. And then the strengths piece is not just solely about understanding strengths, it's about empowering people to take responsibility and to understand what their strengths are, and empowering leaders to focus on strengths instead of the development areas.
No, that's incredibly fascinating and very detailed. And, it makes me think of Elliot Jacques. He was a Canadian psychoanalyst. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's the man.
No, I haven't. No.
Well, you should look him up. He's the man that coined the term company culture. And
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know that.
yeah, he's an interesting guy. He wrote a book called The Changing Culture, and I think it was 1952. He studied an organization in the UK. It was a manufacturing, I think it was a steel manufacturing plant for a period of 2 years, and observed the different behaviors of individuals and teams. And he ended up theorizing there are 8 principles of, I guess, like prerequisites to earn from team members their full commitment, is the terminology he used. And I think that really ties into this principle of fit that you're talking about. And he mentioned things like leadership, vision, having an understanding. Psychological safety was one, and there's 8. And one of them was job. I don't know if he used the word fit or not, but like alignment with the position, like skills to the role. So I think the way that you spoke to this, I think, is really insightful for everyone listening, is as you think about your own job, where you are right now, like have a little bit of introspection to think about what are your own personal values and what are the listed values of the company, and maybe how does that differ from the lived values of the
Yeah,
company? Because sometimes there's a misalignment there,
exactly.
and so I think that's really cool. The autonomy, relatedness, competence, and then strengths in conjunction with the position. And if you feel like capable of doing that thing, everyone wants to fill that. So that incredible insights. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and so I'd love to hear, so, if there is a misalignment,
Mm.
what do you recommend a person does if they've done the introspection and they think that maybe, either their values don't align with the company, or maybe their capabilities or something else? What do
Mm.
they do if there's a misalignment there?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to address is that oftentimes people don't take the time for that introspection. And if you had asked me 5 years ago, what are your values? I would have no idea. What are your needs?
Yeah,
Equally, I have absolutely zero idea. So a lot of the time, we don't know. And if we're asked about values, we kind of maybe default to whatever is on the wall or on the email signature,
yeah,
the company's values. And as Matt said as well, that those are not necessarily the lived experience of the people who are there. So I personally have experienced a couple of places where I realized that again, I didn't have the terminology at the time. I didn't know.
Mhm.
I may have said fit because fit is kind of a bit more broadly used, but like the kind of the academic jargon, I wasn't really familiar with. So for me, there was one place that I knew it was just toxic. It wasn't a good fit, and I had to leave. I just had to get out of there. I had to get out of that situation for myself, for my own mental health. And then another situation where it wasn't toxic for everyone, but it was toxic for me because I wasn't thriving in that environment. It wasn't the right place for me at all. I had a conversation with my manager. It was a large global organization, so there would have been opportunities to move around, to take a different role. I did have that conversation. It didn't really go anywhere, or at least it didn't go as quickly as I would have liked. Again, I think a pace of how things work in an organization is really important. And something that I have realized myself, that I work at quite a fast pace. I like things to happen quickly. So if I'm in an organization that's very bureaucratic, and things take months to get over the line, that would be really frustrating for me. So it wasn't really happening quickly, and I just made the decision that it's not the right place for me at all, and I left without anything to go to. I didn't know what I was going to end up doing next, and that's when I discovered coaching, and I went and pursued that as a field of study, and then started my master's, and then started a business, which was totally unexpected. But that's kind of how I've ended up. So I think having a conversation initially, have that conversation. If you feel like your strengths are not being used at work, if you have so much more to give, a lot of the time people talk about untapped potential. And I did totally unscientific poll on LinkedIn probably about a year ago, and 80% of people, which even surprised me, 80% of people said that they weren't reaching their full potential through their work. And it's really disheartening to hear things like that when people feel like they have so much more to give at work, but they're not having those opportunities to give that, whether they're overworked, whether they just are not in the right role to shine, whatever it might be. People often feel like they still have something inside of them that they kind of want to give to their work.
interesting. So maybe an indicator to be introspective is dissatisfaction, or,
Yeah.
you mentioned toxic, feeling like you're in a toxic workplace for you, or even beyond yourself. But that kind of ignites that introspection. And then, you look, well, what is it that's not lining up
Yeah.
here?
Mm.
And is it something that can be changed? And if not, then essentially you want to exit the organization.
That's exactly it. Yeah, I think that's the spur often is what's going on. And we have a tendency, I think, to blame the situation or to blame other people. But like, what responsibility can you take for yourself in this situation rather than putting the blame outwards? If you want to take full responsibility, what does that look like? Is that leaving? Is that having a difficult conversation? What does that actually look like for you? I think it's important to recognize that. But thank you. I love that explanation, Krista.
So do you have any recommendations to people who um are wanting to do that introspection? Like, are there things that they can do to kind of help them identify what their values are, or you know, what their capabilities
Absolutely.
are or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, capabilities I'll start with first because I think it's easier. There are so many tools online that you can take for free to discover what your strengths are. And maybe you knew they were your strengths already, or maybe you didn't. But I think the thing that we should recognize with strengths is that oftentimes we don't know that our own strengths are strengths because they come so easily and naturally to us. Like I said, I'm discovering these things now. And, you know, people will say, the example I always think of is escape rooms. I love escape rooms. I'm not sure if you've ever done one, but I'll go in and I'll see the clue and I'll be like, oh, that is connected with that. And people are like, how did you do that? I'm like, but that's easy. Like, how did you not do that? So that it's thinking things like that. Where are you showing up where people are like, how did you do that? Or how did you do that so quickly? Or can you show me how to do that? Or saying that you're good at something, that other people are recognizing in you that you're good at something. So I think that's the strengths piece. On the values piece, it's probably a little bit more complex to try and understand it. And it's a longer process and it's an ongoing process, I think, as well. So for me, there's a couple of ways you can look at it. So you can think about, how do you spend your time? How do you want to spend your time? So for me, learning is really important, and learning can maybe be tied in with all of the travel that I've done and exploring the world. It's a really nice way to learn and to meet new people and to connect with people as well. You can think about how you spend your time, how you spend your energy, how you spend your money. Who are the people that you spend time with? What are the things that you have surrounding you in your office, in your home as well? Do you have pictures of family on the wall? Do you have accolades on the wall? What are the things that are important to you? Because you're going to demonstrate them in your life. Another way to think about it is, what are the things that really bother you? So something that I'm discovering that's really bothering me is things that are inefficient. So if I see waste, or if I see things that are much slower than what they need to be, it really frustrates me. So I can say that efficiency is maybe one of my core values. Now, when I said this to someone else, she was like, oh, efficiency makes it seem really quite robotic or something. But you need to add in generosity there as well, because you're very generous with your time and with your knowledge. So I think it's a process of thinking about all of these things, tying them together with a common thread to understand, what are the things that I hold dear? What are the things, and if you think about values as something that it's not related to money whatsoever, and in fact, money kind of goes out the window. Even if it's something that would cost you money, you would still stand your ground for this thing that you believe so strongly in. So if you think about values in a nutshell, it's something that you stand for, knowing what you stand for and knowing what you stand against, and being able to articulate that in a way. And so bringing that into an organization, it's looking at the behaviors around you. And we tend to apply our own values onto other people. So the expectations we have of ourselves in relation to our values are the expectations that we place on others. And so if we see them behaving in a way that misaligns with how we think they should be behaving, then that jars with us and you feel like an internal conflict. You want to say something, maybe you don't feel comfortable saying something, but it causes an internal conflict, and that's kind of how it manifests.
Okay.
It's kind of a dissonance, and you either synchronize with the culture that's at that company and don't feel good about it, or you feel like you can't be yourself because you don't align with that.
That's two so valuable points from there. Thank you so much for articulating that. And it's so right, because we want to feel like we belong in the organization. So sometimes we change ourselves, we mold ourselves to feel that greater sense of belonging with the other people. But then other times there is this kind of, like you say, dissonance. So I don't feel, and I think I had both of those experiences in the past. The environment that we're in has a huge impact on us in the same way that we have an impact on the environment. And I think, Matt, we spoke about this last week. It's not just a case of I am joining this organization and here are the values. The values are a collection of human beings. They're people, they're relationships. It's how we interact with people on a day-to-day basis, essentially. So it's not just thinking of this in the abstract, it's thinking about what's the reality when I joined this organization, and how are people showing up, and how are the relationships that I have with them, and do I want to actually be here, or do I want to remove myself from this situation if it's not something that feels good?
I think that's really powerful. And for everyone listening, we have to realize that, we're in the driver's seat of our own life, of our own careers, and our own experiences. And some things, it's okay for us to have some radical candor and try to address things. Like we can, some misalignments, some elements of dissonance in our work experience, we can address, and it's worth doing that. But some
And
things,
even expected, I would say.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
yeah, we shouldn't be walking around as like these entitled beings that just need everything to rain down on us perfectly according to our checklist. Like, we're
Sometimes
human.
sometimes we feel that way, though. We feel like, I'm doing such a great job, so I should be recognized for that, without the
Yeah,
need to tell everyone how great of a job I'm doing. But it's an important reminder.
100%. And another thing that I would say is sometimes there are seasons in our career
Mm,
where there's an alignment for a time, and we outgrow it in a certain way because we're
so
growing
true.
and
So
we're
true.
changing. And I've experienced that firsthand. And I went from a company that was a best place to work very much on purpose. I wanted to go to another company that had, a lower reputation for company culture. And that was because I wanted to help affect change. And so I had a personal value of going somewhere that didn't check all the boxes on purpose, because I wanted to be part of the change. And so I think
Mm,
for everyone listening, I hope that you get some ideas that you can personalize to yourself and think about what you value and how your current work experience is, but don't let any list from someone else be the absolute checklist. Like, remember, it's your life, you're in the driver's seat. Like,
yeah.
think about what makes sense for you. I like to think of it as, must haves and nice to haves elements to
Mm,
consider.
I love that.
And then that kind of makes it a little easier because the nice to haves, you can be a little bit more loose on those things and maybe work towards something later on in your career. Like, you don't
Yeah.
have to have everything today. You can
Mm,
sacrifice a little bit for the future.
yeah.
And one other thing, I want to hear what your thoughts are on this, Aoife, but one other thing to all of our HR managers and people leaders that are going, what are you doing in this episode? You're making everyone want to leave. Like, stop. Like, there's a book called Who Moved My Cheese that's kind of about this same
I
principle.
love Who Moved My
And
Cheese. I
it
love
kind
it.
of talks through this. Like, you have that conversation with yourself, but really, organizations are collections of people, and people are
Mm,
complex, and we have human needs while the business has business needs. And
yeah.
for those two to work together, for everyone to win, it's this ongoing thing. We're not computers. We can't just be programmed, and we have emotions, we have feelings. And so things are going to change over time, and we have to be honest with ourselves. And if there's a significant disalignment or misalignment, then yes, it makes sense for us to leave. Ultimately, will be a net negative for the company and for ourselves if we just allow ourselves to be in this situation that doesn't align. So it's okay to grow. It's okay to be challenged sometimes and move on to that next position, even if it's in the same company or a different organization. And that will help you be your best, which companies that are their best employ teams where they can be their best.
Yeah.
And so there has to be this kind of mutual thing. So lots of thoughts, but yeah, I want to see if you have anything
Absolutely.
else.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think, yeah, if people are listening today thinking, okay, so that's very well from an individual perspective, how do we do that from a company perspective? I think going back to your earlier point, Matt, understanding what those values are. If you don't have your values defined, define your values, define what is important to the company, and sure that they're meaningful for the people who work there. So it's really important, I think, to get the entire staff involved in the creation of what the values are and an agreement of what that looks like. What does the behavior look like? What does going against the values look like? So first of all, define them. Second of all, make sure they are the lived experience. Is this what people are experiencing at work on a day-to-day basis? Or is there a way that somehow, if you're more senior, it's okay if you do something else? Because that type of behavior will trickle down into the organization. And if it's not stamped out, if it's not dealt with in a positive way, then it's going to filter into the entire organization, and suddenly the values are meaningless. And if there's one value that's, I always think of this value of simple in the most complex organization I ever worked in. And when you say something is simple, or that you value simplicity, and you make things so complex that it's hard for people to do anything, then there's a misalignment there, and people don't really trust what you talk about, what you say, and they don't trust in the other values either. So I think knowing what those values are, making sure that they're lived, and that people are equipped to have conversations to address issues where they are not being lived, but they're equally celebrated for living the values and for demonstrating the values on a day-to-day basis. I think that's really, really important. Building on that, then, when you're hiring people, it's important to know what those values are and hire for culture and hire for values and strengths, I think, at the same time. So you don't have to hire for skills. You don't have to hire for a number of years of experience. Find out if the person is a good fit culturally by understanding the things that are important to them and how they relate to the things that are important to the organization. And also, at the same time, understanding what are their natural strengths and abilities and how are they going to fit in with the rest of the team. So from a culture perspective, you can look at from the organization, from the manager, from the team itself as well. And then also understanding how are they fitting in terms of the role. So are they going to get to use their strengths in this role that we're putting them in?
I love that. I think, you mentioned kind of a two-faced perspective. If a company's not acting the way that they say they are, right? And it's you almost described a company as if they were a person, and it's kind of a similar process on both sides, defining your value, having introspection just on that company level, and then implementing that. And I think probably it's the interview process where that has the biggest impact, because it can be tricky to, fire or find the right place for a person after you've already hired them. And so that interview process is crucial.
Yeah.
And gearing your questions not as much about how many years of experience have you had, or tell me about if you can do
in this hypothetical situation, what would you do?
Yeah.
Understanding them as a person, I think. And
finding
it's very costly for companies to get that wrong. So if you bring the wrong person into the organization, how much time and energy have you invested into that situation? It's so important to get that right, I think, from the get-go. It's so important to make sure that you do it right, because, like you say, I mean, the regulations are a bit stricter in Europe than they would be in the States. So I know it's easier maybe to fire people in the States than it would be in Europe. But even so, if you bring someone into an organization, if they're not performing, if they're not doing what's expected, it's felt in the entire organization. If it's a small group of people, it's really felt, and you have to deal with it, and you have to deal with it really quickly. So I think for that reason, it's important to address that up front, so you make sure that you do bring the right people in. I always talk about the right people as opposed to the best people. Everyone's out there looking for the best talent. It's not. It's about finding the right talent for your organization. So who are the right people to be in that role?
I think that's a great point to kind of wrap our conversation on. Is fit is about the right alignment, both with the people that you're trying to hire and the company that you want to be in, the position that you want to be in, the team that you want to be in. And it's worth taking the time to have that conversation with yourself for your own career, and for those that are people leaders and hiring, it's important to do that as well. And for everyone listening, thanks for being here. Make sure to go check out the Happier at Work podcast with Aoife. It's incredible. And make sure to follow the Culture Prophet. If you loved this episode, leave a review, subscribe, tell your friends. And thanks for being here with us, Aoife.
Thanks, Aoife.
Thank you so much, Matt and Chris. I absolutely love this conversation. I can't wait to listen back.
Thanks for tuning in to the Culture Prophet podcast, and for being a part of our journey to prove that putting people first is best for business.
Today's episode was sponsored by Mobrium.
Want to get more employee reviews and streamline your employer reputation? Visit mobrium.com.
Now go find one way to prioritize your people and watch your profits grow.